How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Gimel, Daf 43 of Masechta Gittin. Friends. Well, today we're continuing talking about 50% avodim and different nafkaminas. Is that what we're talking about? Maybe. Definitely comes up. Yeah, but actually the truth is it starts out talking about something else. Friends, what do you want me to tell you? It's different technical considerations with regarding to avodim. Let's say that. Alright, we're going to end today at the Mishnah Mem Gimel Mid Beis. Alright, let's go weiter. So, we're going to start in Mem Beis and Mem Beis. Babylon? Alright, fine, 1 second. Okay, Babylon complete. Alright, so we're going to start on Daf Mem Beis and Mem Beis, about 5 lines from the bottom. 2, 4, 6 lines from the bottom. Iboilu, they ask a kasha. Eved shemachor rabu leknas, machor o eno machor. Who could tell me what this means? If you have a eved whose master sold him leknas, what does that mean? Okay, it means that, well, we just said yesterday, right? Yeah, I think we said yesterday that if an eved is gored to death by an ox, so then 30 shekels, a flat fee of 30 shekels is paid to his master. Now, just a side note, which is going to be relevant in a minute, this is considered a knas. Right? This 30 shekels is considered a fine, right? Knas as opposed to mammon, right? Meaning this is a flat fee regardless on the value of the eved. This is a flat fee, which means that it has nothing to do with actual value, which would be mammon, like actual monetary value. It's a flat fee, therefore it's considered to be a knas. We're going to see that that's relevant in a minute. So now what this master wants to do is he wants to make a shtickle deal. Let's say we'll call the master Shimon. Now Shimon, the master, goes over to Reuven. He says, Reuven, let me propose a deal. I have an eved. In the event that my eved gets gored to death by an ox, I'm going to make 30 shekels. How about this? If my eved gets gored to death, you'll get the 30 shekels. Not me. All I'm asking is that you pay me, I'm making this up, you pay me 10 shekels now. Or let's make it a better deal, let's sweeten the deal, 5 shekels. So Shimon goes to Reuven, and he says to Reuven, you give me 5 shekels right now, so you're risking 5 shekels, but for the potential gain of 30 shekels. So that's what we're talking about, right? Can Shimon do that? Can Shimon, is that considered a kinyan? Can Shimon sell, right? What's the lashon? Hamocher, right? Eved shemocher rabu leknas, that his master sells him, but only with regard to this knas, right? That it would be considered that Reuven owns the eved, but only with regard to the knas, right? With regard to all other aspects, it still belongs to Shimon. So eved shemachor rabu leknas, if you have an eved whose master sells the eved with regard to the knas, it's an important technical distinction that's going to be relevant later. So machor eno machor. So is the eved, is sort of that kind of a sale or not? Tiboy the Reb Meir, Tiboy the Rabbanon. Now this is a kasha, both according to Reb Meir and according to the rabbis. According to Reb Meir, who says Adam makne dover shelo bala olam, and according to the rabbis who say Ein Adam makne dover shelo bala olam. What does that mean? So let's read weiter for a second. So Tiboy the Reb Meir, Tiboy the Rabbanon, Tiboy the Reb Meir. That Reb Meir says a fellow can make a kinyan on something that does not yet exist. For example, the fruits of a tree, right? If you have a palm tree and the dates have not yet grown on the palm tree, you could already do business with these dates, even though they don't exist yet, but they will exist, but they don't exist yet. So Reb Meir's opinion is that a fellow could be makneh over shlo bal olam. He could sell, he can make a kinyan on something that doesn't yet exist. But the Gemara wants to say, But that's elikagon peiris dekel da avidid da'asu. But they are going to come. I mean, a palm tree produces dates. And therefore, Reb Meir says a fellow can make a kinyan on something that has not yet come, but it will inevitably come. But over here, there's too many variables. Who says that the Eved is going to be gored to death by an ox? That may not ever happen. And even if the Eved does get gored to death by an ox, who says that the owner of the ox is even going to have to pay the 30 shekels because Dilma Mode Umi Pater. As I mentioned a minute ago, this 30 shekels is considered a fine, and there's a concept of Mode Biknas Pater. A person who admits regarding a fine is Pater from paying the fine, and therefore if the owner of the ox goes to Bezdin and says that, yes, I admit it was my ox that killed this Eved, he won't have to pay this 30 shekels fine. And therefore, even according to a Meir who says that Adam makne davar shelo bal olam, that you can make a kinyan on something that does not yet exist, but that's something that doesn't exist yet but will exist, such as dates of a palm tree will exist even if they don't exist yet, but they will grow. But here there's too many variables. Who says the Eved's going to be gored to death? And even if he is, maybe the owner of the ox will admit it in Bezdin before charges are brought, and he won't have to pay the fine. But you can also ask the kasha according to the rabbis, though. The rabbis who say, Ein Adam makne davar shelo bal olam, right? The rabbis say that you cannot be makne, make a kinyan on something that does not yet exist, but maybe over here they would say that you can make this sale. That the rabbis say that with regard to the dates of a palm tree, you can't make a kinyan on something that does not yet exist. Because the dates mamish don't exist right now. These dates do not exist. Come back in a few months, they'll exist. Right now they do not exist anywhere. And therefore the rabbis say, you can't make a kinyan on something that simply does not exist. But over here, the ox exists someplace, the Eved exists someplace. The only thing that's missing is the shidduch, that the ox needs to kill the Eved. And therefore the rabbis say that while that you can't make a kinyan on something that doesn't yet exist, that's something that mamish doesn't exist. But here, maybe Shimon can make this deal with Ruvain regarding some potential future payment of 30 shekels, since all parties involved currently exist. The ox exists, the Eved exists. All we need to see is if there's going to be a shidduch, if the ox is going to gore the Eved to death. So, no, what do we say? Can this kinyan be made or not? So if Shimon goes to Reuven and says, look, let me sell my Eved to you with regard to this potential 30 shekels. What happens? So, Reb Abba says, Reb Abba Toshma, come in here. V'ilid boyis. So the pasuk says regarding Truma. If a kohen has an Eved, so it says v'yilid boyis. So it says if a kohen, so it says two things in the pasuk that we're about to see, right? It says miknas, it says kinyan kesef, that if a kohen purchases an Eved, so then the Eved can eat truma, and also a yilid boyis, if the kohen has a shifcha, knainis, and that shifcha gives birth to a baby, and that baby is an Eved, a second generation Eved, so that Eved can also eat Truma. So now Toshma v'yilid boyis, so it says that any Eved born into his house, i.e. born to a shifcha knainis that he owns, matamuloma. Why do I need the pasuk to teach me that a yilid boyis, that an Eved born to his shifcha knainis can eat Truma? Im kinyan kesef ochel yilid boyis lo kol shekein. If a Eved that he purchased externally, he purchased this Eved and brought him into his household, and that Eved can eat Truma, certainly in inside, right, a Eved who was born into his household, right, that his Shifcha Kanainis gave birth to, certainly he should be able to eat Truma. So Ilu Kain, but the thing is, if we would start with if we would only have the Yilid Boyas, if we would only have the Eved that was born to his Shifcha Knainis, Hayisi Omer, Ilu Kain Hayisi Omer, Ma Kinyan Kesef, Sheyesh Bo Shvei Kesef, Ochel. So I would think, wait, where did I skip? Ilu Kain Kesef Ochel. Ilu Kain Hayisi Omer, Ma Kinyan Kesef. Wait, what? Oh, oops, I don't know what I just said a minute ago. But the question is, why does it have to say both Kinyan Kesef and Yilid Boyas? I don't need it to say Yilid Boyas. If the pasuk already says Kinyan Kesef, and the Kinyan Kesef who came externally can eat Truma, Memele, I know that a Yilid Boyas can also eat Truma, of course. So, Ilu Kain, if it would only say Kinyan Kesef, Hayisi Omer, I would say Ma Kinyan Kesef Sheyesh Bo Shavek Shvei Kesef. That a Kinyan Kesef has to be worth something. Ochel. Af Yilid Boyis Sheyesh Bo Shvei Kesef Ochel. So also a Eved who's born to Shifcha Kanainis can eat Truma, but only if he is worth something. We're going to see an example soon of somebody who's not worth something. How do I know that even if the Yilid Boyas, the Eved who's born into Shifcha Kanainis, how do we know that even if he is not worth anything, he can still eat Truma? Tamlomer Yilid Boyas Mikol Makom. It says Yilid Boyas, that if he's born into the household, Mikol Makom, right? Regardless of if he's worth anything or not. Ve'adayin Ani Omer. But still, if it only had said Yilid Boyas, I would say Yilid Boyas bein sheyesh bo shvei kesef bein she'ein bo shvei kesef. So Yilid Boyas can eat Truma whether he's worth something or not. Ochel, he can eat the Truma. Kinyan Kesef, but if he purchased an Eved externally, yesh bo shvei kesef ochel, ein bo shvei kesef in ochel. So only if that Eved has a value, is worth something, can he eat Truma, but if not, then he can't. Tam lomer Kinyan Kaspo Yilid Beso. That's why we need both Kinyan Kaspo and Yilid Beso, that we compare the two. My Yilid Boyis Afalpi She'eno Shove Klum. So, just like, an Eved that is born to Shifcha Kanainis, is born into his household, can eat Truma even if he is not worth anything. Ochel, he can eat. I keep on forgetting to attach that word ochel. Kinyan Kaspo, so also an Eved who he purchases, even though now he's not worth anything, ochel, he can eat the Truma. Okay, fine. Now, so what did we just say? So we had this whole mission to teach that when it comes to his avodim, they can eat Truma, that is, whether they were purchased, whether they were born into his house, and that's whether they have a value or not. So now, here's the kasha. Going back to our question of, can Shimon sell his Eved to Ruvain with regard to this potential 30 shekels knas? So, V'yisal kadaitech Eved shemachlo rabo liknas mocher. And now, if it enters your mind to say that yes, such a transaction can take place, mi'ika avda Dilo mizdabin liknoso? Is there such a thing as an Eved who does not have any value at all, i.e., even with regard to this fine? Meaning, every Eved must have some value to if he's an Eved, if he gets gored by an ox and he dies, the master gets 30 shekels, right? Gets the 30 shekel fine, receives the 30 shekels fine. So now, this is regardless of if he's worth anything. If he's an Eved and he gets gored to death by an ox, his master gets 30 shekels fine. And if we're saying that Shimon can sell this Eved to Ruvain, specifically with regard to this 30 shekels, and Ruvain is paying Shimon for, right? And that's why I said that it's important, the lashon of, right, Eved shemachro rabba, that his master is selling him. He's selling the Eved to Ruvain, but specifically with regard to this knas payment. And we're saying, so if Ruvain is paying for the Eved with regard to this knas payment, to this fine. So then clearly, if Reuven is willing to pay for this Eved, so then the Eved has a value. So if we're saying that such a sort of sale is valid, well then how could you possibly have any Eved that has no value? They still would get the 30 shekels if they get gored to death by an ox. And if we're saying that Shimon can sell the Eved for that 30 shekels to Reuven, well then any Eved would have at least the value of that particular transaction, that potential transaction. So we say not necessarily, because in Ika Eved Treifa, what if you have an Eved who's a Treifa? If you have an Eved who's a Treifa who's going to die within the next 12 months, I assume that that's the definition for an Eved, that if he's going to die soon, so he's considered a Treifa, and so then his master would not get the 30 shekels knas. So if you have an Eved who has no value and also he's a Treifa, so then there would be then there's literally no value there. But still there's value in that even a Treifa can serve the master, I don't know, bring him stuff. But manuvel mukashchin, but it's talking about an Eved who's a Treifa and he's also a manuvel and a mukashchin. Mamish, he's not, there's no value there in any way. Okay. Okay, so it's not necessarily a proof, right? Meaning, so we wanted to say, that we're talking about right? We had discussed that an Eved who has no value at all can still eat truma, but then we asked the kasha, for the fact that you could potentially have an Eved that has no value at all, it must mean that avodim cannot be sold for their potential knas. To which we said that's not necessarily true, because you can have an Eved that doesn't have a knas. For example, if he's a treifa and he also has no value because he's a menuvel and mukashchin. He's got these he's essentially defined as disgusting and got all sorts of terrible medical issues. Okay, so now they ask a kasha, Eved v'chetzu ben chorin. If you have a fellow who is 50% Eved and 50% ben chorin, okay, whatever, he had two masters, one of them freed him, one of them didn't, he's 50% Eved, 50% ben chorin. Shekidesh bas chorin, and he's mekadesh a bas chorin, a Jewish girl. Ma, is that kiddushin? Are they married? Imtim tzalomar ben Yisrael she'omer levas Yisrael hiskadshi lichatzoyai mikudeshes da. That, well, if a fellow says to a fella, be mikudeshes to half of me, that works. That works. That works. That works. Why does it work? Because what he's saying is, be mikudeshet to me, but also be prepared to share me, because I'm going to want to marry another woman as well. Be prepared to be a kohev. So what he's saying is, you are mikudeshet to me, proper kiddushin, but lichatzoya, you're going to share me, because you're not going to be the only one who's mikudeshet to me. Also another, right? I may marry another woman. Okay. So if you want to say, Imtim Tzalom, if you want to say, Ben Yisrael Sha'amar Bas Yisrael is Kachi L'Chatzoye Mikudeshes, that if he says that be Mikudeshes to half of me, it works. So therefore maybe you want to say, well, you see, she could be Mikudeshes to half of him. So if he's half Ben Chorin and half Eved, so if he's Mekadesh a Bas Chorin, it should be Mikudeshes, because she could be married to half of him, the Ben Chorin half. To which we say, to which we say, no, that's a different story, because when it comes to a fellow who's Mekadesh a fella, and he says, that you're only Mikudeshes to half of me, she's fit to be Mikudeshes to all of him, right? She's Mikudeshes to all of him. Essentially, she's just saying, look, what he's saying is, look, I'm planning to marry another wife, so you're going to have to share me. But she's able to marry all of him. Which is not the case by this fellow who's half Eved, half Ben Chorin. She's only fit to marry the Ben Chorin part of him, but not the Eved part of him, so therefore she's unable to completely marry him, and therefore it's not Kiddushin. Vimtim Tzalomar, maybe you'll say, Fakert Ben Yisrael Amakadesh Chatzi Isha, that if you have a fellow who's Mekadesh half of a woman, right? A fellow who is mekadesh half of a fella, eina mekudeshes. It's not kiddushin. The shear b'kinyano. That's because he left over part of her, right? He wasn't mekadesh her entirely. He was only mekadesh half of her, and half of her he was not mekadesh. That's why it doesn't work. But v'ha eved lo shear b'kinyano. But by the eved, she's mikudeshes to all of him that's able to be mikudeshes. Right, 100% of the ben chorin part of him, she's mikudeshes to. So maybe that's okay. Numai. So what do we say? What do we say? You have a fellow who's chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin. He's mikadesh abas chorin. Is it kiddushin? Isn't it kiddushin? Friends, what do you say? Toshma, come in here. Heim is mi shechetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. No saying chatzi knas lirabo v'chatzi kofer liyorshav. So we said yesterday that if an ox gores to death a fellow who is 50% eved and 50% ben chorin, so in that case we say, well, okay, half of the 30 shekels fine goes to his master, and half of his value, of his actual value, is paid to his family, his inheritance, the people who inherit, his heirs. So nosin chatzi knas l'rabba v'chatzi kofer liyorshav v'i omar kiddushav lav kiddushin yorshin minole. Now when we say, maybe you were wondering this yesterday, that we said, okay, so 15 shekels goes to his master. Okay, fine, I know who his master is, give him 15 shekels. But half of his value goes to his heirs. Who are his heirs? He's an Eved Kanani who's not even fully free. Who are his heirs? Right, we know, right? Gershon is gar katan shenola dami. Right, a fellow who converts, it's like he's born anew. Who are his relatives? So if you say that so you know who his relatives are? His relatives are that he was mekadesh a woman. His relatives are that even though he's half Eved, half Ben Chorin, he was mekadesh a bas Chorin. That's who his relatives are, and that's who gets half of his kofer. The Amrit Kiddush of Lav Kiddushin, and if you're going to say that he cannot be mekadesh a bas Chorin, Yorshin Minole. Well, then who's getting his kofer? Who are his relatives? Well, Rav Ada Bar Ahava says, look, you could say that the Kiddushin is not Kiddushin. The Kiddushin is not Kiddushin. Well, then who are his relatives? Well, Rav Ada Bar Ahava suggests that maybe he didn't actually die, he was made into a treifa. The ox made the fellow into a treifa. And that's why he's being paid right? That's why there's the 30 shekel fine. He's made into a state where he's going to die soon. So we're saying at that point, the owner of the ox would have to pay 30 shekels, and that would go to his master, and his kofer, right? He says, Umay Yorshav Nafshe. And who are his relatives that the kofer would go to himself, because he's still alive. So he would get his own kofer. But because he's made a treifa, so sort of the payments are made to him as if he was killed, but he's still alive, so he gets his kofer. And his master would get the half of the 30 shekels, 15 shekels. Rava says to Rav Ada Bar Ahava, look, I have two kashas. First of all, it says that the money goes to his heirs, not to him. That's question number one. Ve'od kofer hu, ve'omer Rish Lakish, kofer mishtal melachim. We said it again. Ve'od kofer hu. We're talking about kofer. Ve'omer Rish Lakish says Rish Lakish kofer ein mishtalim elo. La'achar misa. The kofer is only paid after death, and while he's a treifa, right? And we're saying that the ox made him a treifa, but he's not dead yet. He's going to die soon, but he's not dead yet. And it says Rish Lakish that kofer payment is only paid after death. So Rav Ada Bar Ahava, don't tell me that he's receiving his kofer payment. The kofer payment isn't paid till he's dead, and obviously at that point he can't receive it. Ella, all my Rave roy li tov ve'ein lo. Rather says Rave, look, no, it's meant at face value that if you have a fellow who is chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin, and he's gored to death by an ox, so 15 shekels goes to his master, and we said that half of his kofer goes to his relatives. So who are his relatives? Rabbi says he doesn't have any relatives. They don't exist. What it's saying is, in theory, who gets the half of the kofer? Because since he's half ben chorin, theoretically he has kofer, and that would go to his heirs. but practically speaking, there actually are no heirs. So in practice, nobody would get that kofar money. But meaning in theory, it would go to his heirs. He doesn't have any heirs. Who are his heirs? He doesn't have any relatives. And if he's mekadesh a woman, it's not mekudeshes. So who are his heirs? Look, l'maisa at the end of the day, nobody gets that money. But theoretically, it would go to his heirs. Okay, fine. Omar Rav, says Rav, Kshem shamakadesh chatzi isha ena mekudeshes. Just like if a fellow were mekadesh half of a fella, she would not be mekudeshes, because you have to be mekadesh an entire fella, not half of a fella. Kach chetzia shifcha vechetzia pas chorin. Also, if you have a fella who is 50% shifcha and 50% pas chorin, sheniskadsha, that she is betrothed, ein kiddushea kiddushin, or kiddushin is not kiddushin. Okay, fine. Very good. So says Rashi, says Rava, just like a fellow cannot be mekadesh half of a fellow, he also cannot be mekadesh a fellow who is chatzi shivcha v'chatzi bas chorin. Fine. Darish Rabba Bar Avuna darshan the same exact thing. Kshem shamikadesh chatzi isha ein mekudeshes. Just like a fellow who's mekadesh half of a fella is she's not mekudeshes. Kach chetzia shivcha v'chetzi bas chorin. Also, if she's 50% shivcha, 50% bas chorin, sheniskadsha ein mekudeshes, she is not mekudeshes. Amalei Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says midami. Chizda says those are under zachen. Those are two different cases. Also, shir b'kinyanu. If a fellow is mekadesh 50% of a fella, so he left over 50% of her. He wasn't entirely mekadesh her. Hacha lo shir b'kinyanu. But if a fellow is mekadesh a fella who's 50% shivcha and 50% bas chorin, well, in that case, he was mekadesh the entire bas chorin part, right? He was mekadesh the entire part of her that he was able to be mekadesh. And therefore, if Chizda argues that it would be kiddushin. 1 second. I think there are people talking outside. 1 second. This isn't the first time that there were people talking outside. Why are they talking? As my neighbor pointed out to one of the tour guides recently, you're making your living at our expense. So these people are talking at our expense. They're talking at Babylon Talmud's expense. Let's go weiter. So therefore, if Chizda wants to say that it is Kiddushin, because after all, he was Mekadesh, the entire Bas Chorin part of her. Okay. Hadu'ukim Rabba Bar Avuna Amora Ole. So Rabba Bar Avuna did an about face, and he got like a maturgaman, somebody to be a human microphone for him. Vidarish, and he darshan v'machshela azos tachas yodecho. And this failure, that is, wait, where am I? Oh, okay. And this failure that is under your hand, ein adam omed al divrei Torah elo im kein nichshol boin. That a fellow only stands on divrei Torah, he establishes divrei Torah if he fails by them first. In order to really make your way in halacha and in divrei Torah, is by humiliating yourself and failing first. Basically, what he's saying is that I first had said the halacha that if a fellow is mekadesh, a fellow who's 50% shivcha and 50% bas chorin, it does not work. I stand corrected. Af al pi she'amru mekadesh chatzi isha eni mekudeshes. Even though if a fellow is mekadesh half of a fellow, it is not a good kiddushin. Aval chetzia shivcha v'chetzia bas chorin sheniskacha kiddushea kiddushin. But if a fellow is mekadesh, a fellow who is 50% shivcha and 50% bas chorin, it is a good kiddushin. My time hakam hasum shir b'kinyano hacha lo shir b'kinyano. Because when a fellow is mekadesh 50% of a fellow, so he's leaving over 50%. He's not being mekadesh her entirely, and therefore it's not a good kiddushin. But if he's mekadesh a fellow who is 50% shivcha and 50% bas chorin, and he's being mekadesh the entire bas chorin part of her, then it is good kiddushin. Amar Rav Sheshes says Rav Sheshes, Kishem shamakadesh chatzi isha ein mekudeshes. Rav Sheshes, however, argues and maintains that just like a fellow who's mekadesh 50% of a fellow, it is not kiddushin. Similarly, if a fellow is 50% shifcha and 50% paschorin, a fellow cannot be mekadesh her because he can only be mekadesh 50% of her. And if some smart aleck is going to try to say but ezui shifcha charufa. What is a shifcha charufa? That's basically right. We've been sort of discussing that the past few days, or at least discussing similar scenarios. A shifcha charufa is, or at least what we're going to suggest now, we're going to see right now that it's a machlokas, but a shifcha charufa is a woman, a fella who is 50% shifcha and 50% paschorin, and she is engaged to an Eved Ivri, because an Eved Ivri is mutter to Shifcha Knainis, and also to a Baschorin. So if you have this woman who's 50% Shifcha and 50% Baschorin, and she's betrothed to an Eved Ivri, so Ezui Shifcha Charufa zo shechetzi Shifcha v'chetzi Baschorin, hame'orasa le'Eved Ivri, and she is engaged, betrothed to an Eved Ivri. So Alma Bas Isrusehi. So we see that she is able, that it's good kiddushin. Here you have an Eved Ivri who's a Jew, and he's being mekadesh a woman who is a 50% shifcha, 50% baschorin, and we're saying hame'orasa, they're engaged, they're betrothed. Apparently it's kiddushin. So apparently you can be mekadesh a woman who's 50% shifcha, 50% baschorin. So now Rav Sheshes had said that you cannot, right? Because, right, you only be mekadesh 50% of her. So v'im l'choshcha, right? What do we say? V'im l'choshcha adam lomer. If a smart aleck is going to come and say, but, what about shifcha charufa? What about the fact that here you have this woman who's 50% shifcha, 50% baschorin, and it says that she's engaged to an Eved Ivri? Emor lo, say to that smart aleck, what about Rabbi Shmuel's opinion, who says, Shu omer b'shifcha kenainis hame'orasa le'eved ivri? Rabbi Shmuel disagrees and says that a shifcha charufa is actually an eved knainis, shifcha knainis, who is engaged to an eved ivri. Now, b'shifcha knainis pas isrusehi, is a shifcha knainis able to be engaged, able to be betrothed? So what does it mean? So what does it mean? My me'oreses, what does it mean? So according to Rabbi Shmuel, who says that it's talking about a shifcha knainis who's me'oreses to an Eved Ivri. There's no erisin by shifcha knainis. So obviously then, when it says erisin, it doesn't literally mean erisin. Miyuchedes. It means that she was set aside for what's it called? Like when you like make something designated, maybe, right? That they're a thing. They're a thing. So me'oreses in this context only means that they're a thing. So therefore, here also it means that they're a thing. Meaning, Rav Sheshes maintains that just like if a fellow is mekadesh half of a fellow, that doesn't work. So also if a fellow is mekadesh a fellow who's 50% shifcha, 50% paschorin, it doesn't work. And if you're going to say but, what about shifcha charufa, that it says that she's 50% shifcha, 50% paschorin, and it says that she's engaged, she's betrothed to an Eved Ivri. So clearly there is betrothal by 50% shifcha, 50% paschorin. So Rav Sheshes says meh. That's not a proof, because if you look at Rabbi Shmuel's opinion, Rabbi Shmuel argues that it's talking about when she is entirely 100% a shifcha kanainis and she's engaged, she's betrothed to an Eved Ivri. But clearly there it doesn't mean betrothed, because there's no betrothal by shifcha kanainis. Clearly erisin there doesn't actually mean erisin. So therefore by shifcha charufa, however you understand it, whether it's that she's an shifcha kanainis, whether she's 50% shifcha kanainis, 50% paschorin, either way it's not talking about betrothal. So don't bring a raya from there that there's kiddushin. That's Rav Sheshes' argument. Rav Chisda says, Rav Chisda, Chetzia shifcha v'chetzia baschorin. If you have a fella who is 50% shifcha and 50% baschorin, sheniskadsha l'Ruven. Okay. And Ruven was Mekadisher. Oh, great. So now it's the Shaila. Do you hold like Rav Chizda and Rabbi Bar Avuna that it's that it's good Kiddushin? Do we hold like Rav Sheshis and Rav who say it's not good Kiddushin? What do we do? Okay, so anyways, Ruven was Mekadisher. V'nishtachara, now she gets freed. Because of V'niskadisher l'Shimon. And then Ruven's brother Shimon is Mekadisher. V'mesu shneim, and now both Ruven and Shimon are in Wellwood. Great. So Misyabemes leLevi. So Mimon Avshach, she does Yibum with Levi. Vein Ani Koriba Eshes Shnei Mesim, and we don't say that. What was the line that we said in Yevamis? What do we say in Yevamis? It says Umeis Echod Me Misha Oleh Zikas Yovim Echod V'lo Shela Zikas Shnei Yevamin. Right? That Yibum is only coming from one brother, not from two. But here it's not coming from two brothers. Because if when Ruven was Mekadisher as a 50% Shifcha, 50% Baschorin, if that's Kiddushin, so Kiddushin Shimon Lav Kiddushin. Then when Shimon was Mekadisher after she was freed, well, she was ready Mekadeshes to Ruven, so Shimon's Kiddushin is garnished, is nothing. The Kiddushin the Shimon Kiddushin, and if Shimon's Kiddushin were valid Kiddushin, well, Kiddushin to Ruven, Lav Kiddushin, and Memele, Ruven's Kiddushin were not Kiddushin, right? So therefore, in this case, where Ruven was Mekadisher when she was 50% Shifcha, 50% Baschorin, then she was freed, and then Shimon was Mekadisher, they both died, she was only Mekadeshes to one of them. So Memele, Levi, the brother, the leftover brother, would be able to do Yibum because, while he doesn't know exactly whether Ruven or Shimon was Mekadeshes, she was Mekadeshes Ruven or Shimon, she doesn't know which one, but definitely one of them. And therefore, Levi can do Yibum with her. Itmar was stated, Chetzia Shifcha v'Chetzia Baschorin. Okay, if you have a woman who is 50% Shifcha, 50% Baschorin, she is Kadsha LeRuven, and she was Mekudeshes to Ruven. Okay, Ruven, gave her Kesef Kiddushin, let's say, it was Mekadesher. V'nishtachara, and then she was freed. But then V'chazov Niskadsha LeShimon. But then, after being freed, she then was betrothed to Shimon, and Reuven and Shimon are not related in this case. So she was, right, so Reuven was Mekadesher when she was 50% Shivcha, 50% Baschorin. And then she was freed entirely. And then Shimon was Mekadesher. Rav Yosef Bar Chama Amar Rav Nachman Paku Kiddushay Rishon. So, Rav Yosef Bar Chama says the name of Nachman that when she was freed, the whatever Kiddushin that Reuven was Mekadesher when she was 50% Shivcha, 50% Baschorin, vanishes, goes away. Reb Zera Amar Rav Nachman Gamru Kiddushay Rishon. Whereas Reb Zera says the name of Nachman that Nisht Fakert, that when Reuven was Mekadesher when she was 50% Shivcha, 50% Baschorin, when she's then freed, that Kiddushin now takes full effect. Not like Rav Yosef Bar Chama in the name of Nachman who says that they vanish and they disappear. Nisht, fakert. Reb Zera says the name of Nachman that when she gets freed, then her Kiddushin at that point takes full effect. Amar Reb Zera Kavose Didi Mistaven. Reb Zera wants to bring a proof for his opinion. Dechsev, as the puzzle says, Lo Yumsu Kilo Chu Pasha. That if we assume that, right, this pasuk is in the context of Shifcha Charufa, that if we assume that a Shifcha Charufa is a woman who's 50% Shifcha, 50% Baschorin, who is Me'oreses, she's engaged to a Eved Ivri. And while she's engaged to that Eved Ivri, somebody else sleeps with her. So we say that that fellow who sleeps with her is not chayiv for sleeping with an Eishes Ish, because she's 50% Shivcha, 50% Baschorin, and he brings a Korban Asham. So it says, Lo Yumsu Kilo Chu Pasha. The reason why there's no capital punishment is because Kilo Chu Pasha, because she wasn't yet freed. She was 50% Shivcha, 50% Baschorin. Ha Chu Pasha Yumsu. But if she was freed, then there would be capital. punishment. So we see just the act of freeing her, makes the kiddushin to the Eved Ivri take full force, take full effect, to the extent that now there would be capital punishment. So we see that the freedom, her being freed, makes the kiddushin take full effect. But Abaye says to Reb Zeir, but what do you do about Tana Dever Bishma? The Amar B'Shifcha Knainis Hamaresis Levet Ivri. You says that Shifcha Charufa is talking about a Shifcha Knainis who is betrothed to an Eved Ivri. That wouldn't make any sense to say that, the reason why there is no capital punishment is because she hasn't been freed. But if she was freed, then there would be capital punishment. But if she's a Shifcha Kanainis, the fact that he betrothed her is irrelevant. There's no kiddushin at all when it comes to Shifcha Kanainis. So Elamai Yislach Lemeimar, what do you have to say? You have to say, according to Rabbi Yishmael, who says that it's a Shifcha Kanainis who is designated to an Eved Ivri. So it means that after she was freed, they then got betrothed, right? Then there was kiddushin. And if at that point she would, somebody else would sleep with her, then there would be capital punishment. So here also, Reb Zeir will say that even when she's 50% shifcha and 50% paschorin, we're saying that there's no capital offense because she was not freed and mikudeshes at that point. Amar of Huna, so therefore it's not a proof to say that just the act of freedom makes the prior kiddushin take full effect. That's not clear. Amar of Huna bar Katina, says Huna bar Katina, Amar of Yitzchok, says Rabbi Yitzchok, Maise be'isha achas, it was a piece of Maise with a woman, shechetze shivcha, v'chetze baschorin, she was 50% shivcha, 50% baschorin, v'chafu is rabba v'asa baschorin, and we forced her remaining master to free her, to make her 100% free. Kiman, so who's this like? Why did we force him to free her? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, is it like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, the Omer, al shneim hu Omer, v'ayvarech osem elokim v'yomer v'gomer pru revu malu v'gomer? Is it because we pass in the Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who says that the mitzvah of pru revu is on both fellows as well as fellas, and therefore right now she's stuck, she can't get married to we need to free her so that she can marry a fellow and do the mitzvah puravu. No, it has nothing to do with the mitzvah puravu. It has to do with the fact that if she's in this middle state where she can't marry an Eved, she can't marry a Ben Chorin, so then the people are going to be doing averis with her, and we don't want that. So we say, look, free her so that she can get married to a Jewish fellow. Friends, we're going to stop over here. Wow, there was quite a bit on this daf. The first part of the daf we talked about, can you sell an Eved specifically with regard to the 30 shekels? Fine. We got into the question of Adam Makna Davar Shel Ba'al Olam or Ein Adam Makna Davar Shel Ba'al Olam. Then we got into the sugya of, can a fellow who's 50% Eved, 50% Ben Chorin be Mekadesh a woman? And we got into the kasha of, can a fellow be Mekadesh a woman who's 50% Shifcha, 50% Paschor? We saw Machlokas, some say yes, some say no. Friends, that was Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Gittin. I hope you enjoy. Peace out.